Hi everyone, welcome back. So I'd like to introduce Erich Berger from the director of the BioArt Society.
So thank you very much, Kira. I will just first have a quick run through what the BioArt Society is and quickly hybrid matters, but then I try to kind of focus a little bit on a different side. So BioArt Society, as I said already yesterday, is an art association with more than 80 members here in Helsinki, and it is fostering interdisciplinary work between arts and the natural sciences with a focus on biology, ecology and life sciences. And if you wish, we are interested in the kind of biological condition at large. So we ask questions like, what can life do? Or actually also, what is life doing? But we also ask, again, the principal question, what is life? Especially in retrospect to new biotechnologies like synthetic biology, which really suggest this question also again. But with this focus of our activities, we also have different locations of our works, and they are diverse as well. And so we move naturally back and forth from working in the landscape, developing, testing, evaluating notions of artistic field work, like we do with our work at the Kilpisjärvi Biological Station in Lapland. But we also move into the laboratory to work with these field samples or do biological work where we need laboratory conditions. And one could go now, of course, a lot into these kind of different practices, but I will not. And but we also show and probe and test our works, our ideas within these emerging art practices, and find out also how we can basically talk about this to the wider public, to the audience, how to engage people into this topic. But hybrid matters is why we are here today, and this symposium and also yesterday the opening of the exhibition is basically the conclusion of a 2 years project, which was a Nordic art and science project funded by the Nordic Cultural Fund, and together with 6 partners. And we had a range of activities throughout these 2 years. Every partner has brought something specific to the project. And what we were looking at was basically the material conditions and the transformative power of human activity at large via artistic and scientific research. And if you want to know more about that, because I will also not go here into it, then please have a look at our fabulous website, which was actually made by John and Agnieszka, and I think John is here. Agnieszka is still sick a little bit. But check it out and you will see a lot of these activities, also like what Åsa and Christina were talking before, but also of the other partners. And but now I go back basically to what does it mean when we say that hybrid matters investigate the convergence of our environment and technology. What is this hybrid ecologies? How do we arrive there? What is the background of this thought vehicle? And I'm borrowing now something Jennifer said yesterday. She said that she's hitching a ride. I'm also now hitching a ride. I go now a little bit back into art history, but I'm not an art historian. So some of you might know more about that, what I'm saying now. But it's one sort of strand or attempt to tell how we arrived at hybrid matters, actually. So depicting nature is probably one of the most successful domains of the artistic endeavor during the course of Western art history. The representation of nature through art was thought most challenging for the artist. Nature not only was considered beautiful, but actually sublime. to have a quality of greatness beyond the possibility of mere representation, to catch the sublime and to understand this back then new aesthetic category was specifically pursued by artists during the Romantic period. And Romantic artists used specifically the epic of nature as an expression for this sublime. Examples are well known, the German painter Caspar David Friedrich, or paintings from the Norwegian Romantic nationalism, like we have here, the Bridal Party in Hardanger by Hans Gude and Adolf Tiedemann. And in Finland, of course, we also have the national romanticism, and when we go at Atheneum, we see really a grand collection there about this. And for example, Eero Janefeld is one of these proponents, very, very famous. These paintings and many of its numberless, also then cheap counterparts, and its follow-up in photography laid down a fundament and a legacy from which, when we think about nature, our minds form pictures of untouched mountain views, seascapes, and misty scenes. The interesting thing actually about these two pictures specifically is that this landscape does not exist. You will not find it. You will not be able to locate this spot and see, okay, I'm here on this river, I see this mountain. So it's a fiction. It's a fiction to kind of also to compete with nature by the painter. Another interesting thing about Kohli is that this is considered to be the national landscape of Finland. And it is depicted not only in these paintings, but you find it everywhere on postcards, you find it on post stamps and things like that. And the painters, with this kind of legacy, actually painted the current national park into being, because that was actually, I think, only established in the 90s, and there was no really specific reason to make a national park there, because it was used land and people were living there. It had no specific kind of ecology to preserve. It was just basically painted into being through art. So the quote at the slide is taken from Timothy Morton's Ecology Without Nature, where he argues that part of our current ecological crisis is that we perceive nature as something we are embedded in, and we act as if would be independent from our doings instead of realizing that we are part of our environment and thus part also of this ecology, or of its ecology. He argues to abandon our concept of nature to develop an ecological thought, which he defines as the thinking of interconnectedness. Today, we can see an increasing amount of artists working with this environment, ecology and natural phenomena. With many of these artists, it is the crisis of the Anthropocene in its different appearances which drives them to work in this area. The question is, can these contemporary practices be seen as a continuation of a line of work emerging in the 60s and in the 70s? These practices, now known as land art, earthworks, ecological art or environmental art, were concerned with landscape and the environment, or they used the land and organic matter as a material. These practices include today very well-known works such as Richard Long's A Line Made by Walking, which was a visible line in the field, which was produced actually by walking repeatedly back and forth. Another well-known example is Walter de Maria's work, The New York Earth Room, which takes basically another step, because here the landscape was, or the natural matter has moved into the gallery that defines a frame then, and in which the landscape is perceived as an individual and detached object already. And the installation moved then into the Dia Art Foundation, where it is still exhibited. Finland has a very strong tradition in land art and in environmental art practices. And in the 80s and in the 90s, even the Finnish government commissioned some two international artworks. The one we see here, Agnes Denés, The Tree Mountain. It's a longer title, but you can read it here. And this is resides in the reclaimed gravel fields of Ylöjärvi as a vast environmental construct. Another work is Up and Under by Nancy Holt, and it's also a large-scale land art work located at the Pinsio Sanctuary in Nokia, here in Finland. However, it is fairly difficult to make a clear-cut borders around artistic practices that involve environment, landscape, and ecology. These practices involve types of works and aspects mentioned above, but also works that, for example, deal with animals or investigate natural and physical phenomena. Like the installation Sky Space by James Turrell in Houston, a spectacle that involves, on the one hand, the evening sky, but also very, very dependent on the human sensory physiology. The developments in the first decades now of the 21st century, with artists more and more being interested in the natural sciences and newly emerging artistic practices such as biological arts, brings up the question of how these historical and contemporary practices relate to each other beyond their use of organic matter or landscape. Lucy Lippert points out that many of the early monumental land artworks would hardly be considered environmental or would possibly be even acceptable from today's point of view. However, one can point to a clear similarity in the approaches of monumental land art and contemporary bioart. Instead of representing the existing world, these practices are actively constructing the world, which also makes them clearly differ from other more traditional art forms. But reviewing our contemporary environment in comparison, we could argue that the environment itself has underwent a massive change compared to the time of Romanticism and further also during the beginning of land art in the late 60s. So what I want to say, or the point I want to make, is that environmental art today finds a completely changed environment compared to back then, the environment that these artists have been engaging with. This work is by Marike Skikorso. It's also in the exhibition as a video. It's the Albedo logger from the series Albedo Dreams, and it's an ironic take on climate engineering, where she basically suggests that we all should help to reflect the energy of the sun back by reflective material we are wearing, so that that we prevent heating up the globe. There are also dresses or suits for reindeer and cats she was making. So everybody has to kind of put something into it. So anyway, this environmental change, let's look at that. It's becoming actually nicely visible when we examine when the virtual worlds, formerly only available on our desktop computers, started to converge with our everyday life with the appearance of mobile computing. And in 2006, scholar De Souza and Silva defined hybrid spaces as arising when virtual communities, like chats and mats previously enacted in what was conceptualized as cyberspace, migrate to physical spaces due to the use of mobile technology and interfaces, social media, basically. We can interpret and read these hybrid spaces actually as a symptom of a change in our environment, the advent of mobile computing with not only social but also physical implications, because to have mobile computing you need mobile computing infrastructure. Yeah? So cables, network cables get replaced by mobile phones or other mobile devices. During 2008, Laura Beloff expanded the hybrid space concept to the notion of hybrid environment, to be able to apply biosemiotics in the sense of concept of Umwelt of Jakob von Uexküll. We can also see here a work by Laura, which is also in the exhibition. It's the work The Condition. So what we can observe now is that on the one hand, our physical environment is becoming more increasingly technologically informed, and on the other hand, technology, through an increase in networks, become increasingly ecological, in the sense of ecology as the study of interactions among organisms and their environment. So we have all of a sudden more actors, more connection points, but different ones in our environment. Also, this term ubiquitous computing, which you might be familiar with, is actually also called environmental computing because it becomes part of our environment. This technologically assisted convergence does not only happen in this kind of hard and software area I was pointing out. We have always been biohackers is a catchphrase which circles through the DIY biology community, beside it clearly being an ironic paraphrase of We Have Never Been Modern by Bruno Latour. The phrase emphasizes that already early human cultures interacted on an albeit crude technological base with their immediate biological environment. This resulted in cultural technologies like agriculture, beekeeping, animal husbandry, or different fermentation technologies. Thus, humans, together with other species, evolved together in interaction and dependency and shaped each other. Humans used proactive procedures to select certain qualities in some of these companion species, and so arrived at the milk cow, the dog, or brewery yeast, which are in this sense not natural but evolved with us together. The procedures were rather selective than invasive, so that already visible traits were amplified through breeding. But contemporary life sciences is going way beyond these crude methods and speeds up the evolutionary clock and directs evolution with synthetic biology or corrects it with CRISPR-Cas9. Both new and extremely hyped biotechnologies. We don't know how they will play out if they keep their promises. Synthetic biology, for example, attempts to design and construct purposeful biological devices by creating DNA building bricks. And such a brick system was inserted by us during one of our synthetic biology workshops to produce different colors of light in E. coli. These so-called biobricks can be selections of DNA from other organisms which encode a certain function, or they can be completely synthetic without having a likeness to DNA from existing organisms. They are bioengineered to produce a novel designed organism with the purpose to produce certain chemicals or drugs, or which grow into a chair or a city. I'm pointing out to Oron because we heard about that recently from him. Already now, genetically modified organisms like transgenic corn or soy are grown in different places out in the world. Effects on food availability and economy, and also the interaction with the environment at large, are questions with these newly introduced organisms. Creatures in environments and ecologies have been in the domain of the biological. But as biotechnology now shows that the biological itself becomes technological and technologically altered, and the results feed back into the conventional evolved environment. We begin to project our images as living organisms back into the environment. And probably you also heard of another hype which is called de-extinction, the resurrection of long-dead animals like the woolly mammoth, which are more a PR stunt or PR vehicle for biotechnologies to give food for the genohype. But however, the concept of livability, who and what gets to live, and how, by Judith Butler, comes to mind. With such biotechnologies, the concept of livability needs to be expanded actually into who or what gets resurrected and what stays in suspension as biological potential. So when we talk about the technologically informed ecology, we are not only to recognize the clearly technological components, but also increasingly genetically modified organisms and probably soon synthetic organisms which we introduce into the environment and which have a techno-scientific origin, but are biological in nature. No, actually it's the other way around. They are biological in material, but have a techno-scientific origin. So, from hybrid space to hybrid environment, we find ourselves then in these new hybrid ecologies, which are unfolded through the complex interactions of elements and actors within, which can be human, non-human, biological, machine, or even mineral nature. An interesting analysis of possible products of such a hybrid ecology, maybe as an idea of an evidence or an indicator, gives British philosopher Timothy Morton, who coined in 2010 the term hyperobject, to describe objects that are so massively distributed in time and space as to transcend the spatio-temporal specificity. As examples, he gives global warming, plastics, and radionuclides. These examples can be read as secretions of such a hybrid ecology, but are also actors in themselves. And I think that was Thora was pointing out to that basically all these things she was seeing on the beach, they are not only like pollution, they are actually part of the environment, pointing to such hyperobjects. Hannah Husberg's installation in the vast ocean of air, which was commissioned by Hybrid Matters for the exhibition, explores air as a medium for hyperobjects, but also discusses the man-made changes in the Earth system currently discussed in many disciplines as the Anthropocene at the moment. The Anthropocene is maybe one of these grand narratives Stein was maybe pointing to and wishing for, but when we use it, first of all, we already realized in the kind of 2 days there is a lot of hype behind that, but I think it's also important to kind of see beyond the hype, yeah? and make use of it. Yeah? But there is a paradox in it because it kind of highlights exactly, it erects a monument for what we are actually, what we try to tackle. Yeah? And what is really interesting that the Anthropocene actually, you will hear a lot of different derivatives of it now. So maybe it points also out that this big grand story is not what we need. We need many small stories, yeah? And we need to help each story to kind of find its place instead of having one simple one which fits everything and which reduces everything into one concept. So I did a year ago a little Facebook survey on the what are the synonyms or what are other kind of expressions which come along with the Anthropocene, and the ones which I circled in red, they are used, or I found them in academic papers, and the others are suggestions by people, some made up on the fly, yeah, and my favorite ones. Like Jussi is not here anymore, but the Anthropocene is actually quite nice, pointing on the obscenity of these actions. But my absolute favorite is the Misanthropocene, yeah? Because with its dark humor, it hints that we bury ourselves actually before we are dead. Yeah? However, the Anthropocene, it's not clear if it will enter the geological epoch timeline. I think we are very close to that, but it is a very useful term to speak about what is happening. But more useful is actually to produce more of this kind of synonyms. Yeah, and also what we heard before, the work of the plastic imaginaries by Asa Stoll and Christina Lindström explore a new geological entity, the plastic glomerates, which in my sense is a vehicle to speculate about, to live with plastic. So the question of evidence for me doesn't come so much up, and I find it also kind of quite necessary to produce some plastic glomerates, yeah, to not for having material evidence, but having to have the experience and to use this experience then exactly to find out how we can live with it, because it's not only waste, it's part of our ecology. So continuing with the notion of Anthropocene, I'm specifically interested in the dichotomy between the perception and understanding of time in everyday human life and the time of biological, environmental, and geological processes which we as humans are part of and which can run on very different timescales. So the real life challenge is that we as individuals are asked to change our way of life or contribute to projects and measures to secure a future which we will not be part of, and for people which we will never know, like with global warming, or like here in Finland with the Onkalo nuclear waste repository. So do we as individuals and society lack of a foundation on how to discuss and act upon such deep future matters? In the same instant, we subject ourselves to deal with processes which are immensely short, like quantum photonic effects in plants, but also unbearable long, like the performance of landscape folding in continental drift. Perhaps a question to ask in our context is, how can art assist to perform the Anthropocene or any of these scenes which we've seen before? Anyway, to sum it up, Hybrid Matters investigates this convergence which I was talking about of environment with technology, and I hope that this notion becomes now a little bit more clear because it was repeatedly used before. It explores the term hybrid ecologies, which is for us a thought vehicle to talk about these intentional and unintentional transformations of our planet through our activity. And also to repeat that there are not only biological actors, we have technological ones like robots, software, networks, and increasingly also genetically engineered organisms which blur the boundary because they are, as I said also before, biological in material but technological in nature. However, the crucial thing is not the convergence, but our position in it and with it. Do we continue to externalize it like we did with the concept of nature? This is why it is problematic. Or do we recognize that we are part of it and take responsibility of our life world? And with this 2 years program and the many activities which happened in it, we wanted to provide a possibility to rethink and re-evaluate our relations to the world. I don't know if it happened, maybe individually, and that is already a fantastic result. So as humans, we drive this process. So we are part of both biology and technology. And we ask, how can we address both ends and develop respectful and mutual beneficial forms of coexistence for all the actors in such a hybrid ecology? Thank you.